Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. I'm your host of this podcast, Doc Frank, and my guest today is Roy Unny. Roy is the National Executive Chair of the RTSA, that's the Railway Technical Society of Australasia. And accordingly, we talk a lot about this organization and also their organization of the upcoming core conference in Melbourne. That's the Conference for Railway Excellence. But we also talk about a few other things, including what it means to enter the railway industry at a more advanced stage of your career, a move from Canada to Australia around the world, the importance of mindset change, the change impact of new signaling on the wider railway industry, interoperability, and so on and so forth. I hope you enjoy. Hi, it's Doc Frank here. Real quick, I want to let you know about one of the best CBTC trainings in the world, if not the very best, but you always need to be careful with superlatives. It's the CBTC Kickstarter online course. It consists of 30 video lessons. That's the 3 with the 0. In total, over 11 hours of training content, talking about everything from the basics of CBTC, current standards, the benefits of CBTC, the key functionality of it, the supply industry, application tips and tricks, lessons learned, do's and don'ts, case studies, arguably the most comprehensive training that you can find anywhere on the topic of CBTC. There are a few additional things that make learning easier for you that you may not find on any other online courses. One of them being an immersion plan that helps guiding you through the training course and progress it in a finite period of time instead of just having it sit there for months and months on end. There is access to an online study group where you can connect with other students who are doing that training course at the time and form learning groups. There will be live coaching calls once every 2 weeks. And after the training, you will not be on your own. There is an alumni community that allows you to ask questions about the course content on an ongoing basis. So it's basically education for life. You can inform yourself about this training course and register to it on my training portal, which is docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC Kickstarter -online 2023. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC Kickstarter -online 2023. I look forward to seeing you at that training. And until then, please enjoy my upcoming episode of this podcast. Roy, welcome to the show.
Hello, Frank. Wie geht's?
Very good. Thank you very much. Nice of you to greet me in German.
It indirectly led to me being in the rail industry, actually. I learned German when I was young. I'm part German and ended up working for Siemens Mobility for 10 years.
Okay. Did you just work for mobility in Siemens, or did you do other things before? Because I don't think you always worked for the railways, right?
No, I didn't. I actually started out in a bit of a long career here, but oil and gas and then water, wastewater, and then ended up in transportation and loved it and got very fascinated by the projects and did a bit of a mid-career change to actually join a company like Siemens, which was probably unusual at the time where I was in my career and et cetera, but it was an opportunity that I couldn't say no to at the time. And maybe the background in German that I had, it was like the perfect opportunity. And I truly enjoyed my time working at Siemens, and it actually led me from Canada to Australia. I was part of an international management exchange program, and well, 11 years later, I'm still in Australia, obviously working on consultancy now, but really enjoyed the time at Siemens.
Okay. I mean, the move from Canada to Australia is not really around the corner. I was looking into traveling to a conference in Canada a few months ago, and I ended up not doing it because it was literally at the opposite end of the world, and the travel times were quite outstanding. So, how did it come that you mentioned a management exchange program, but how did it come about to make the decision to move away from Canada and go to the literally opposite end of the world, to Australia?
It was not an easy decision, but the children were young at the time and there were no language issues. And it just sounded like a great opportunity for it was really only supposed to be for 3 years. And what I discovered is the way business is conducted between Canada and Australia is very similar. The way contracts are let, it's beyond just the language, just the way of doing business. It was seamless to me. I came here, was asked by management at the time to come here, and said, yeah, why not? And then obviously, as you and I are both, not originally not from Australia, but you grow to love the country, and there's many opportunities here. And when I look in particular at the rail sector today, what a change from 2011 when I first came. It is unbelievable, the change.
Yes, that's true. A lot of things are happening, and I did a recording just recently for the RTSA, which will probably come online in the next few weeks, depending on their timelines, where I talked about signaling developments in Australia, basically saying that Australia is pretty close to a global showcase for modern signaling technologies, because we've got everything here. We've got CBTC here, we've got ETCS here, very modern versions of ETCS for that matter. And we also have some of the American positive train control here, and we've got a few derivatives of those modern systems, which are almost unique in the world. For example, what we're doing at Autohaul with Rio Tinto, driverless heavy haul freight trains, and so on. So a lot of very interesting things. And you're right, they have all more or less evolved over the last 10 years or so. Maybe some of them have started a bit earlier, but they have all come to fruition over the last 10 years. So the change is really quite massive here.
And what you explain is Australia in a microcosm in the rail sector. You know, a lot of people talk about track gauges as a historical way we look at things differently, but we accept the best technology from around the world. And yes, we have become a showcase for the different technologies. And I don't necessarily view that as a negative. I view that as a positive. We're taking the learnings and we're exploring them. So the fact that Australia wasn't a leader initially in CBTC, where Canada was, isn't necessarily a bad thing. We're at the party now. That's what's important. Yes. And we've got CBTC coming everywhere, and we're taking the learnings elsewhere. But it was one of my observations when I came here, and coming from Canada, between Toronto and Vancouver, and Edmonton was doing it at the time. CBTC was just normal. And suddenly to come here and see how groundbreaking it was at the time initially was a bit of a shock. But you know what? We've done that quick learning curve, and we're there now, and that's really the important takeaway.
Yes, that's correct. And I mean, if you are not the first in line, if you come a little bit later, then as you said, there's opportunity to learn from lessons that other railways have done and to do things better. And yeah, to CBTC to some extent, because a lot of the stuff that's happening in Sydney is based on previous learnings in Hong Kong. And with regards to ETCS, I'm quite confident in saying that the applications that we're currently introducing in Sydney and in Brisbane are really state of the art when it comes to modern applications of ETCS. So we are really on the way to learn the lessons and to say, okay, well, how can we apply it maybe even better than in the original places when it comes to ETCS in Europe, for example, where they have many problems in many countries. They have problems with ETCS. Everything runs much slower. The projects
implementation is much slower than anticipated. The rollout is much slower, it takes much longer. And here in Australia, things look reasonably good, at least for ETCS level 2, what's currently happening in Sydney and in Brisbane.
Yeah, definitely. And Perth coming up, and opportunities around the country, not just in signaling, but in electrification, for example, which is some of the work I've done in the past. If you look, for example, at new metro lines in Sydney and Melbourne, they're embracing the latest in 25 kV AC technology, which has superior advantages in terms of rolling stock speed, footprints of substations, etc. So we're delivering top-notch projects in Australia now.
Yes. I mean, especially when new projects are introduced, and Sydney Metro was an example for that, and in Melbourne Suburban Rail Loop maybe another example. There is really a big opportunity to do things differently from how it was previously done in Australia. And you mentioned 25 kV AC for the catenary system for the power supply of the railways. So I'm assuming this is what Melbourne is doing on the suburban rail loop. Whereas if you look at Sydney for Sydney Metro, I still quite can't comprehend why they decided to go for the legacy system, the same that's used on the Sydney Trains network, even though for a metro system, that's quite unusual what they've got there. So with regards to electrification, I think Sydney missed an opportunity, and it's good to see that that Melbourne is going on a little bit more advanced path there.
Sydney Metro Western Airport, I believe, is going to be 25 kVAC. So it's not Sydney, and it has broken the ground a little bit in that aspect. So we'll see what happens over the next 10 years. But we're delivering top-notch projects today, but in 10 years we're still going to be delivering them. It will be the rail environment in this country in 10 years will be that much more of a step change than we are today. So it's exciting times. And the industry has been supercharged. And as we are aware today, in June 2023, there is some, not slowdown. Slowdown is probably the wrong term to use, but there has been a bit of a relaxation of bringing projects to market across the states and at the federal level. And it was probably needed at one level. And of course, the market may overreact to it, but in the big picture, it doesn't mean that there's a decline. It's just the rate of increase is probably slowing down just a little bit.
Yeah, and in some regard, that may even be a positive thing. I just posted the other day on LinkedIn that there are some delays for projects in Melbourne, for example, the Airport Rail and also Geelong Fast Rail. But because Melbourne is in the process of rethinking their signaling strategy, such a project delay could actually be a good thing, because that really gives the opportunity to refine the strategy further, and then making sure that when those projects get back online and get really implemented, that they will be aligned with the strategy, which may not be the case if they are rushed now before the strategy is ready.
Yeah, I'm not involved in that, but I can understand the logic. It makes perfect sense. So we'll see what happens in Melbourne, and obviously Perth has a large opportunity for a new signaling supplier to come in. So we'll see what happens in Perth in the next year. So it's interesting times, certainly.
Yes. Definitely. Talking about logic and plausibility of logic, you may probably know or have seen that I was recently on my soapbox in LinkedIn and so on, basically saying that with the implementation of modern signaling, or some people call it high capacity signaling, Melbourne, for example, calls it like this, Perth as well, it is something, or it's a change to a railway that does not only affect the signaling department by saying, hey, it's a new signaling technology, so the signaling people deal with it. I would see this as a much wider change that affects most of the railway organization, including a lot of people who had never any dealings with signaling before. From your perspective, I mean, you are a bit more of a generalist. Would you kind of subscribe to that? Do you think that argument has merit, or do you see it differently?
Oh, 100% it has merits. Modern signaling projects are as much IT projects as they are signaling projects. And it is a mindset change. And when you're delivering IT projects, there's different approaches to how to deliver them. You do have to think about obsolescence more than you, let's say, used to have to think about. And how do you do replacements, whether it's wholesale upgrades, et cetera. The concept of if we talk about signaling, of a relay interlocking lasting for 100 years is not the same as a signaling or a CBTC communications device lasting for 100 years. It's the timelines are just different now. So we all in the rail industry have to accept that and understand what it means to do these upgrades that are needed. When you deliver an IT project, nobody's using a computer anymore that they were using in the 1980s. And so that's a very important aspect to take. Now, there are advantages of doing it because safety is increased now. The throughput obviously is increased. So it's a trade-off that we've had to make as professionals. And so there is a mindset change, and it has been occurring. And if I look at my background coming from 5 years in oil and gas and then about 10 years in water, wastewater, they were doing that mindset change 20, 30 years ago. And rail has come to that now. And so I've been able to build on the learnings I took from those industries. So I was always a little bit more focused in, let's say, automation type area. I've become more of a design manager now. But when you're focused in that area, when I first started getting involved in rail projects, I was like, oh, this is a little bit behind, but we've caught up, and now we're taking those learnings. So when I look at my background, it's actually perfectly suited me to where I am today in the work that I do.
Do you see that mindset change in railway happening quick enough? Because I recently came to the insight that mindset may be one of the big next hurdles coming up for this change into a more modern railway environment. So there are instances looking at lessons learned from other cities, from other countries, where a project seemed to be perfect from the outside. There was a solid planning. The implementation looked good, the right technology, the supplier was okay. And still the project was struggling. So I was thinking about what could be the reason for that, when from the outside everything seems all right, but it still doesn't work out all right. And I thought that might actually be a mindset problem where the large parts of the railway organization struggle to make the shift from the previous old organization to let's call it high capacity organization. Yeah. So I tend to say that you don't just need high capacity signaling, you are transforming the railway into a high capacity railway, and that requires high capacity railway stuff and high capacity passengers, which is another discussion altogether. But it does require a mind shift change, quite a significant one. And some organizations have struggled with that. So how optimistic are you that in Australia we're getting it right, and we're getting it right fast enough?
I'm optimistic going forward for a number of reasons. The first one being the concept of lessons learned is very much in train now, and it's not lessons learned within Australia, it's lessons learned internationally. So last year, Mark Weil did a tour around this country about the lessons learned from Crossrail, and he was very open about it, and I think the message was very well received. I think the second item is today in the rail industry, it is very international, and we here in Australia are competing in a global market, but we are attracting international talent here. So it's not just looking in-house, it's bringing international talent here that bring those learnings with them already inherent in how they deliver projects. And the third one is, and something we can't avoid, is generational change. You and I are, let's say, on the older side, but Gen Z are coming into the rail market now, and we have to get them to deliver the projects, but with the mindsets that they have, they are not going to spend 10, 12, 15 years learning rail fundamentals because that's part of a long-term career path. They're smarter, they've got access to more knowledge, and yeah, we have to get them very quickly trained, so they'll bring that mindset with them. So those to me are a number of the key issues that I'm very optimistic going forward. Yeah, there'll be some hurdles here and there. And so I recently actually just did a paper, which I'll be presenting at the CORE 2023 conference in a few weeks about reference class forecasting, which is actually saying, hey, here's how things have been in the past. How can we use this to predict project schedule, cost performance going forward? So hopefully people attend CORE and see my paper.
Yes, well, yeah, that remains to be hoped. As you know, I'm presenting at CORE myself, and you were quite instrumental in doing this. You kind of twisted my arm to put an abstract in, and then you convinced me to put the second abstract in. So I did that, and to my surprise, both abstracts got accepted. So I'm actually presenting twice at CORE. One presentation is about that whole concept of training. So training modern signaling technologies to particularly non-signaling people to really facilitate that mindset shift in the wider railway organization, not just focused in the signaling department. And the other presentation is about the history of CBTC in New York, which, by the way, was one of the railways where the client themselves said, we've got cultural issues here. We struggle with the cultural change to the new environment under CBTC. And there's a lot of opportunity left on the table as yet, because of the slow change of the organization to that new environment. So I think a couple of very interesting topics as well, which, support the whole notion that CORE is really one of the top conferences in Australia when it comes to, well, as the name says, railway excellence.
Yeah, I'm particularly interested in the New York study and seeing what the results are, partly because it demonstrates how things have changed over the last 25 years. So this is RTSA's 25th year. But the concept of interoperability, which is a key part of what New York wanted to do, is very much discussed in the Australian rail context. So here's one example where somebody a city or an agency started with interoperability as a philosophy. So yeah, looking forward to seeing your paper at CORE. Yes.
Yeah, interoperability has gotten a new drive in Australia, shall we say. But the problem, I mean, even though the definition of interoperability is probably the same thing, the context is slightly different, or it was different in New York than it is here. So in New York, we're talking about one railway organization, one network, and interoperability between the different lines of the network and between different suppliers of CBTC, whereas in Australia, it's more interoperability across the entire country. So between different cities, different railway organizations, and then, of course, with the one network that connects everything, which is the interstate network sitting between all the major Australian cities. So the challenge in Australia is slightly different. And and looking at New York, one thing I can already say is that they have shed a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, literally, to get to where they wanted to get, which is interoperability between three CBTC suppliers. And one of the lessons there is that don't try to do what New York has done. Yeah, so this is something that I can
you're already giving away the conclusion
talk about.
Of your paper.
But a lot of the paper that I did is about lessons learned, and while saying that for CBTC in Australia, the situation is very different from the situation in New York, and the CBTC applications in Australia handle that interoperability topic in a very different way. So there's not so much lesson learned there, but there are a lot of other things that can be taken from the happenings in New York that are very, very instructive for railways here in Australia. So there's a strong lessons learned element in the paper and also in the presentation. And I think people may be surprised, that the lessons learned gets a very different take from what they may have expected.
Mm-hmm. Definitely so. Looking forward to the paper, which is a great segue to talking about core and RTSA. So first, I'd like to thank you for being an RTSA member for many years, but perhaps if you allow me to maybe talk a few minutes about the RTSA.
Absolutely. Yeah, you beat me on it, asking you for it.
So I'm the National Executive Chair of the Railway Technical Society of Australasia. We're a technical society of engineers Australia and engineering New Zealand. I never envisioned I would be in this role, but I decided not all engineers need to volunteer some of their professional time. And so I got involved in the RTSA and very quickly ended up being part of the national committee, and then put up my hand to be the national chair. This is our 25th year. We actually did exist before 25 years as the National Committee on Rail Engineering. So we've always had a technical focus. In our first few years, we did a bit of lobbying, but we're really focused on the body of knowledge and representing the professionals for the most part who are active maintainers, et cetera, who are in rail. So we've got 2,000 members around the country and in New Zealand. And it's as good as the effort that we put into it. We're all volunteers. We don't do this for anything other than to giving back professionally. And so I find it very fulfilling. It does take a lot of my personal time, but it is something that I was very interested in doing, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's one of the things we do is run the Conference on Railway Excellence every 2 years. So I have been involved in the organizing committee on that. So it does take a lot of time as well. But the conference, we're really looking forward to this year's conference. 90 papers again, a lot of great guest speakers. And it's all about giving back to the community of professionals and engineers out there. And we're looking forward to a successful conference this year.
Yeah. I have seen you've had this chairman role in the RTSA for several years already. So that's a different concept from, for example, in the RSE, where these presidential roles change every year after 12 months. So it certainly has its pros and cons. I mean, if you have change more often, then more people come in with different ideas. On the other hand, if somebody is on the chair for a longer period of time, there's more continuity, and you certainly have better chances to implement changes over a period of, say, 3 years compared to a period of just 1 year, when you know after 1 year it's over and you need to basically make place for your successor.
Mm-hmm. So partly this is a result of COVID. Just like many organizations, we've had to rethink how we do things post-COVID. So even RTSA is now will be going more towards a national events program. Pre-COVID, we were very much focused at let's say the state chapter level. So these changes are going to be happening, but this will be my last year as the chair. They're just by natural progression, there does need to be some turnover, and it's important to bring new people involved into the national committee, etc. But I've thoroughly enjoyed my time. As I said, COVID was a struggle, but we've come through that. And we did successfully run core in Perth in the middle of COVID somehow. There was this one window, and we took it after a delay of a year. We took great advantage of it, and we've come back very successfully now with this core. We've got a number of awards that we've given out now, and where there'll be a few future updates coming in the area of a rail engineering area of practice that we're working on with Engineers Australia, and looking at further professional development opportunities for engineers.
That's great. I definitely wanted to use the opportunity talking to you about this to thank you for your service, as they say, because I think it's really important that we have people like yourself who are still in the middle of the industry with a lot of experience and a lot of ongoing interesting things to work on, that also spend some time in parallel to basically give back to the industry and basically transfer their modern knowledge and their modern ideas into organizations such as RTSA. So thank you very much for that, especially for doing it for so long. I mean, even with COVID in between, doing something like this for multiple years is certainly a stretch. And it requires really a lot of sacrifice and a lot of like personal determination to be of service to the industry. So thank you very much for that. How much of an effort is it to put a conference like CORE together? I mean, obviously you're not doing this by yourself. There will be an organizing committee, and you also have an event facilitator helping you with the nuts and bolts of putting a conference together and registrations and all kinds of things. But still, how much additional effort was that? So if you compare your recent few months going towards CORE with your activity levels when CORE wasn't that much of a topic, how would you compare that?
It's probably, for me personally, it increased about 25%, but I'm not the conference chair. So our conference chair on their own has basically turned it into almost a full-time job. And there's a committee of 10 behind him, and none of us are paid. Yes, we pay the conference organizer, but the committee of 10 then is supported by, we must have had 30 or 40 reviewers of papers. So in total, we're well in excess of 50 volunteers who are putting into their time into ensuring it's a successful technical conference. The amount of effort to organize technical tours, review the papers, as I said, organize a young professionals event. So it's a whole team. And so, we're talking hundreds of hours, but it's what's necessary. It's the only way you can pull these off. And we have to actually start planning the next CORE already now and plant the seeds. Wait until 3 weeks to find out where the next CORE will be. But you have to start actually almost 2 years in advance. So the good news is this is our 14th CORE, I believe. We have a very developed CORE operating manual that we follow. So we've been very good engineers, and we've developed that manual that's passed on from one committee to another. And so that ensures that we keep having successful conferences.
That's a good idea, to basically write it down and not reinvent the wheel each and every time. So I'm curious to see what will come out of this. And it's not, by far not my first conference. I was at several CORE conferences, presented at several CORE conferences, and to my shame, I must admit that when CORE finally came to Perth, where I live, I passed because of COVID at the time. And so I'm trying to make up for coming to Melbourne and doing 2 presentations there for the one that I missed before.
Yeah, we look forward to it. And we've gone back to an in-person conference this time. So there's no hybrid availability this time. And it's really, we'll get some lessons learned after CORE to really see that this is what professionals out there want. As you're well aware, coming out of COVID, there are, including this podcast, there are so many opportunities to learn online now. But it does miss sometimes some of that interpersonal connection. You and I, of course, have met personally before, and we have that already. But if you're a new professional coming into the industry, you need some of that to really start to develop those networks. And once you've got that developed, yes, you can probably convert to a bit more of an online presence, but it really does need, in my view, and we'll see what happens as a result of this core, a bit more of that in-person connection.
Yes. Yes. I think if COVID had one positive thing, it was that there's now more flexibility regarding the formats in which certain things are conveyed. So you mentioned hybrid conferences. Online offers for training programs or webinars or something are certainly another thing. I'm very excited that associated with CORE on the day after the conference, I'm doing a training course in Melbourne, which will actually be my first live training since the start of COVID. So for over 3 years, I haven't been on a stage or haven't been in a classroom for a training course. And to be honest, I missed it. I mean, during COVID, it was probably a good idea that it didn't happen, because the last thing I would want is that I have a room full of people and then everybody gets sick afterwards. And they said, this is because we joined Frank's training course. So certainly no trainer would ever want that. But now where we are pretty much out of COVID, or well, on a good way out of COVID, I'm looking very much forward to having another classroom with people sitting in there on the 22nd of June, and hopefully doing a very insightful and entertaining event as well. But talking of hybrid formats, I'm already thinking about turning this training into an online format later on, because people who will not be able to come to Melbourne for that event, and people these days they are used to virtual events or hybrid events or watching YouTube pretty much every day. They will say, hey, where's the online offer? What can I do? How can I get this training if I'm not able to be in Melbourne on the 22nd of June? And I think it's only fair to think about an answer for that. So that's certainly one of the outcomes of COVID. I think that there is more flexibility and also more variety in how certain things are taught, information is brought about. And I mean, you mentioned it as well for the RTSA, which is going through a similar change.
Yeah, certainly training is an area of interest, has always been an area of interest and involvement of the RTSA. And training today is much different than it would have been pre-COVID. You have to accept that there are multiple ways of receiving training. It's not just watching YouTube videos, it's online classes where everyone is participating via Teams. Some of it is in person. And you have to be able to be flexible with training going forward. For the rail industry in particular, it's very important because very few people come into rail with a 5 years of education of rail. You learn rail as you do it. And the only way you can, beyond doing it, is to take courses such as what you offer if you want to understand what's going elsewhere. Otherwise, it is learned by practicing and doing it and being involved in the project. So I came into rail by working on projects. It wasn't because I went and took a course, and certainly I've taken a number of courses after entering the rail industry, but practicing is important, and most of practicing is actually in person. So on one hand, you do need some of that in-person training as well, but I do love the fact of the flexibility of doing online and the multimedia approach that's available. And training today needs to partly be maybe more similar to what you do, and we'll use the term micro-credentialing, but shorter blasts that specifically meet a requirement. And the concept of somebody going and spending a year training or taking a 6-month course is becoming more, it's not as common, I think, as it used to be. So we really have to focus on these, what I would call the micro-credentials.
And I believe it's also the type of content that's included in training courses that will have to change, or in parts has already changed. You can shorten someone's learning curve by focusing really on, well, there's lessons learned again, So like the do's and don'ts, how to do certain things and how to better not do certain things. And I found in my training courses where I'm putting a lot of emphasis on those things that people, even if they are completely new to the railway, they have really a very, very steep learning curve, and they start getting like dangerous quite quickly, and dangerous in a positive way, that they are basically capable of discussing certain things at eye level where even experienced people said, oh, he really knows this stuff. Yeah. And it's not just by learning a few buzzwords and then dropping a few smart acronyms or something like that. It's by really understanding certain key connections between certain things and understanding some key concepts, what to do it properly and what not to do to avoid things where others have learned the hard way before.
So back in November, I went back to my alma mater where I graduated engineering, University of Waterloo in Waterloo, Ontario, and gave a talk to the second year class about socioeconomic impacts of rail and talked about lessons in Australia. But one of the topics that I talked about was how safety is a number one factor that you always deal with in rail, and it's basically the edict at the top, and you work down from there. And I use the segue because a lot of these young engineers say, "Oh, I'm going to go work on Tesla and go work on their driverless cars." And I said, that's fine, but is safety the number one factor behind it? What's driving this? And understand how we've come from two different places. We may end up still have driverless cars and driverless trains, but where rail has come from is a much different place than where the auto suppliers are coming from. And that's not to say that driverless cars are not a thing, but I much more appreciate the fact of safety being a predominant driver in how rail does things, and it permeates in the behavior of everyone, and to me that's good.
And I think even for driverless cars, just picking up on where you just left with your last answer. Even for driverless cars, I think people might be surprised once they find out how much safety considerations are in the design of those cars, and how much more safety will play a major role if you want to replace the role of the car driver with all the senses, the eyes and the knowledge and the experience of which situations to avoid, where to be careful, when to reduce speed a little bit because somebody in front is driving in a funny way and something like that. If you replace all of this with an autonomous system, with an automatic system, there are a lot of safety considerations that will come to the forefront. And I think people will be surprised how much more safety will be a concern, a major concern for all these design issues.
I don't disagree with you. Safety may have not been the original purpose, but I think it will be coming. And if you look at all the forms of transport, planes are autopilot. Most large freight ships are driverless effectively as well, and trains as we well know. So yes, there's no reason why passenger cars or freight trucks won't be coming that way as well. So yeah, it'll be a very interesting future in the next 20 years. Convergence of technologies in one sense.
Yeah.
And hopefully rail can learn from the other industries. We don't necessarily need to, or they can learn from us. It's a two-way training that both parties can or both all of us can learn from each other.
It's important to learn the lessons, but also appreciate the specialties of different transport modes, for example. So if you take the railway system, for example, there is certainly one thing which a car can do, which a train can't, and that's swerving around an obstacle. Yeah, because the train is guided by those railway tracks, which a car is not. So this is something that people just need to keep in mind, the other thing is certainly the physics of the wheel-rail interface, that the braking behavior is a bit different with a metal wheel on a metal rail compared to a rubber tire on tarmac. Well, as long as these differences are considered and then people realize that it's not 100% transferable, then I think there's a fair space for lessons learned where things can be transferred from one transport mode to another.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time. It was a very insightful and very engaging conversations. I almost ran over time, even though I promised I wouldn't. Thank you very much for your time. I think it was very interesting to hear both your personal journey with the change into the railway industry at a relatively late state, and also your views on an organization like the RTSA and conferences such as CORE. I hope that the listeners had a lot of lessons that they can take away. So having that podcast as a lessons learned exercise as well. So thanks very much, Roy. It was a pleasure having you as a guest.
Thank you, Frank, and I look forward to seeing you at CORE 2023 in a few weeks.
Definitely. Thanks very much. And to all our listeners, as usual, if you enjoyed that episode, please like and subscribe and tell your friends about it. And until next time, keep it simple and bye for now.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again, real quick before you head off. If you are a fan of communications-based train control or short CBTC, there's an event coming up in September that you absolutely don't want to miss. It's the first virtual global CBTC conference. It's called CBTC World Summit 2023, and it's happening on the 20th and the 21st of September. There will be 3 sessions of about 6 hours duration each for 3 different global regions, one for Asia Pacific, one's for North and South America, and one's for Europe and the Middle East. So wherever you are in the world, one of those sessions will be during the daytime in your time zone, and you can watch it live for the full 6 hours with 6 presentations. The kicker about this is that all other presentations, including the ones from your own session, will be available for replay via recordings. So that means that if the other session should be in the middle of your night, you can still watch it on demand at a time that's more convenient for you and doesn't interfere with your good night's sleep. The conference is available for registration right now at my training portal under docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I'm putting a lot of effort into this conference. It will be an absolute blockbuster event, and I very much hope to see you there. Until then, keep it simple and bye for now. Hey, Doc Frank here, host of the Railway Conversations podcast. Thank you for listening.